Welcome and thank you to all of you for joining us for another episode of the Husqvarna Water Connection series. And today we're going to be talking about something that I think is going to get more and more urgent and important as the summer goes on. And that is water management for commercial properties. You know, the commercial properties use the most amount of water in the landscapes in urban areas. And there's a lot of pressure we're seeing day to day for them to manage their water more efficiently, which puts a requirement on property managers, building owners, and also contractors to do this well. It can mean the difference between success and failure of your commercial project. And today, helping all of you understand the value and the challenges of water management on commercial properties is Orbit CEO Stuart Eyring, who I got to tell you, it's hard to find anybody who's a more passionate advocate for water management than Stuart. Stuart, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Richard, thank you. And it's hard to find anyone more passionate than I am, except for Richard. And I want to congratulate Richard on his book that came out. And he's been doing just separately radio and other interviews. And it's called Water-Wise Gardening. And I highly recommend it.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. That was a surprise, and I really appreciate you pointing that out because that's been a definitely a project for me that has been a work of passion and love.
Yeah, valuable reference, Richard, from a master gardener, which you are, and I appreciate the time it took to write that, and hope many have the opportunity to read it and benefit from the knowledge you have. But yes, commercial irrigation and how to achieve savings in that environment. Great topic.
Yeah, so Stuart, help me understand, or help our viewers understand too, why this is such an important topic right now. Man, you sent me a link of an article from Salt Lake yesterday, Utah News, about what's happening there. I mean, this is becoming a real focal point and almost, it's almost catching fire.
And it's almost catching fire without enough water to douse the fire, right? And obviously the water, scarcity is what is driving that. And the water scarcity is really being driven by changes in weather patterns. And there's even debate or, fiery debate over what is driving those changes, whether it's long-term or whether it's shorter term. But I think that we've seen it now persist for really now, we'll say several years. We've seen almost a decade in the West of drier conditions. And the larger properties tend to be a real focal point. People see them. In some cases, those properties are so large that the schedules don't quite fit within a nighttime watering schedule. People see then water irrigation happening during the day, and then they say, well, why should I conserve if they're not conserving, at this property? So it's there's fiery debate and not enough water to put it out.
Yeah. So then the other thing that I think is a challenge for people, and I'm interested in your opinion on this. A lot of people say, well, we're going to water to the proper amount, but we're going to have a landscape that doesn't look good. What do you say to those people?
Yeah, that really is tough. Is part of it's the landscape, that it looks good, and there's a debate around functional turf, and with if it looks good, the aesthetic part of it, almost at this point is definitionally that not functional. And the functional part of it is then, really the turf that is actually used. But if you talk to landscape and irrigation managers, for instance, in a city park, they'll tell you that we have alternative turfs that could be installed, like here buffalo grass, and the superintendents and the site managers will say, yeah, but that's not what the customers, the citizens expect when they come to a park. They're looking for something soft. There is now even more alternative grass, which actually can yield more water savings. But ultimately, it's a combination of the aesthetics and the functionality, right? So functional turf being something that people are happy using.
Yeah, that's a great point too. And certainly I've said more than once, it's not what you water, it's how you water.
Yeah.
But there tends to be a focus on what we're watering instead of how. And so speaking of that, really, what are some of the challenges that these managers, water managers, contractors, building owners are facing when it comes to commercial properties and irrigation?
Great. Well, all those on the webinar who manage commercial properties or design and install commercial properties know that first and foremost, it's scale and complexity. Generally speaking, and this is a generalization because there are residential landscapes that can be quite complex, but the scale of complexity of a commercial landscape is almost definitionally many times higher than a residential landscape. That means in terms of the hydrozones within it, the different plantings within it, and then also just the valve and the controller complexity. Often in the case in today's world of a large property, it being a two-wire controller as opposed to a traditional multi-wire controller. But then for many of the older properties, it's going to potentially be multiple multi-wire controllers across that property, all of which need to be scheduled appropriately and adjusted appropriately over time. And then all of those heads and increasingly, drip irrigation that needs to be monitored and maintained as well. Lots of complexity in the site. And then the other one is the money that is spent designing, installing, and maintaining those site, which over the long term, maintenance being a very, very significant portion of the total investment cost or the total expenses associated with a commercial site. And then the expertise that's required for the individuals who do that site management, whether that be an in-house contractor or whether that is contracted to a third-party management service.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Stuart. You bring up some really great points. Many years ago, when I was at Valley Crest, account manager would typically have, now depending on the size of the commercial account, may have up to 30 commercial accounts that they were managing. And if you think that of those 30, it just averages 3 controllers of property, you're up to 90, 100 controllers really quickly. Now, I don't know how, without a smart timer, without a good dashboard and a good app, that you can actually manage that. You can, of course, but the time required is just to manage that complexity is really high. So, boy, when you start thinking about reducing the cost of labor as you can more easily manage the water, it's a double savings, right? It's on the labor and it's on the water savings. So great points.
The automation of the irrigation is a really important part of it. And that automation now including the ability to have smart connectivity, which really is a little bit distinct, and we'll talk about more as we go, distinct from the idea of actually then having smart inputs, be that moisture sensor, increasingly weather-based inputs into it. So that smart in the ability to connect and be in a remote location and control the irrigation, and then smart from the standpoint of being able to control the scheduling in an intelligent way, weather moisture sensor based.
Yeah, so we just had you mentioned the soil moisture, and we just had a question come in. A person's asking about soil moisture sensors versus a weather-based controller that just measures ET. Are they similar? Is there a big difference? What? And you've got the technical expertise to answer this. What do you think?
Yeah, so if you think of it as the old, idea of exogenous or endogenous, starting from the small to the big, or the big to the small. Weather, of course, starts from the big and then brings that down to a smaller level, with the moisture sensor really starting at a very localized place and then making inferences about the larger. As we all know, in that kind of logic, the moisture sensor placement then becomes very, very important. and how representative that moisture sensor is with respect to the soil, plants around it. And so potentially, if there was a large variety, which there often is in commercial landscapes, it's often not just turf, that then requires multiple sensors where which can be very, very accurate as long as you have those multiple sensors. But the weather-based allows you to take a much larger area with much more diversity in it, and then make inferences and fine-tune those over time. So just different approaches. We like them both, don't we, Richard?
Yeah, but I think about this, Stuart, even for my commercial property, one side of my building is going to be shady most of the time. I've got turf planted, plus shrubs, plus annuals. I'm really going to need a soil moisture sensor for all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. To be accurate, what I would say though, and it's I think part of the benefit we feel like we bring to the equation, even with all of the smart aspects that are being applied, is that there's still some management skill that comes into play with either a weather-based controller or a moisture sensor-based controller, in terms of fine-tuning the scheduling over time to the specific zone characteristics.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah, certainly agree with you there. Now, there are some other challenges that property managers and property owners are having today as well, right?
Definitely. And two of those, of course, are the stricter regulations. My guess is that we've already in southern Utah seen the drought restrictions come into effect. My guess is that at some point this summer, we'll see that for northern Utah. As you look across the West, and if you just look at our latest, not our latest, but NOAA's latest weather maps, you'll just see that the West has been very dry again. That was forecast coming out of the spring, that we'd have a hot summer. And then as expected, we've seen rainfall as you look east, with just generally cooler temperatures. But the drought restrictions are a big factor. And then the other one is, and we're seeing increasingly, that tiered rates are being used to help control water consumption. And so to help reduce demand, the tiered rates are being used, and we're seeing legislation increasingly being passed that allows for the tiered rates to be used to help manage demand in the face of declining supply. And then we're seeing penalties get applied where people go over certain budgets. So kind of those different factors of the pricing of water, the curtailments that are put on the amount of water that can be used, and then the penalties that get applied if it's overused. And then just also among the challenges, we would have to call out the harm that's caused by poor irrigation practice. And obviously that can include underwatering, but as often it can include overwatering. And then the effects of that on the quality of the plants, on the quality of the soil health, the tendency of then leaching to happen in many types of soil, or many soil types, when too much irrigation water is applied. And then there's certain phosphates, for instance, and nitrogen bind differently to the soil. And nitrogen is just a great example of where that can be flushed out of a soil. Phosphorus also can be flushed out of a soil when there's excess irrigation, which then creates problems in waterways. And so again, commercial irrigation can have a significant impact on the not just quality of life right within the area that's being irrigated, but in the waterways beyond that, since in many cases there are creeks associated with them, ponds, and in some cases even where that water might percolate back into a shallow aquifer.
Yeah. Yeah, great points, right? This the fertilizer waste and the potential pollution into the water table is big. The other one that used to really drive me crazy was extra water or overwatering leads to runoff. And if you're in an HOA or even a nice Class A building, and you're getting that runoff on your asphalt, the water's floating the oil, it's separating them, and anytime you've gone through a parking lot repaving, you know what a hassle that is for everybody. So you want to be sure you don't do that too often. And I think that's another big challenge that we don't always think about when it comes to commercial properties, but that's a big challenge. Now, I want to ask you, Stuart, and I wrote an article about this today, and I should have checked with you before I did, but I think, or what do you think on this? I think that if somebody is overwatering their commercial building and they have tenants that are in that building, I think there's a potential for the brand of those tenants to actually be associated with that overwatering and people not appreciating those companies as much. Do you think that's a stretch from a guy who's just really caught up in this, or do you think that's a possibility?
Well, that's an article that I certainly approve of. I think that premise is absolutely right, and that applies to state and church organizations as well. Is that there is a perception that is created, and that article that I had sent you regarding the reaction to the increase in water use here in the Salt Lake Valley, the comments were just almost entirely negative in terms of look at what other people are doing. And as I mentioned earlier, commercial properties sometimes do have justification for watering outside of a residential water window just because of the constraints of the source, right? Is that you only have so much water available at any given time for that property, and you may need to use it in a larger window. But while that can bring criticism of people saying, well, look at them, doing, not doing as they say.
Yeah, certainly in that article, in the comments, you saw water shaming happening. And it's very disturbing, right? Because we wish that somebody would have pointed out some good examples too, right?
Yeah, and I think on the other hand, I think it can be positive when it's done well, and we'll get into, right, as we talk a little bit more. We'll show some examples of where the results have been great, the costs have been controlled, and they become then, I think, really, they become good examples of what can go well when water is used right. I don't think that ultimately anyone would argue. I think sometimes it almost seems that those who are trying to, protect water supply or reduce the demand on that supply, it almost seems like they don't like landscape, the way the messaging comes across sometimes. But I believe that just in general, there's very, very broad agreement where even among the most conservation minded, there's broad agreement that green spaces are important. And I think that the brand can be negatively affected, or the perception, if it's not done well. But I think on the other hand, it can highlight an example of a best practice done well. And that's what we're going to, I think, talk about in the balance today, is to say, how do we turn what is a negative and a fiery topic into something that actually is a positive.
Yeah, and you're actually the best person to do that with your optimistic viewpoint. And but I do think it is interesting, right, that people are coming around to this concept of more plant material means cooler temperatures, and so we really have to take a look at removing plants. Maybe it saves water, maybe it doesn't, because in fact the temperatures increase when we do that. So what is the balance? Where is that? But let's talk about smart irrigation. And we hear this term a lot; it's thrown around a lot. But Stuart, help us out. What do you think smart irrigation is?
Well, I think that we first just start out, right, Richard? I think you and I both agree. We're in violent agreement, right, on the point that a smart controller is ultimately not an advantage if the underlying irrigation system is bad. And so Richard and I were looking at a project the other day, and there were two aspects of it being bid. One was an overhaul of the system, and the other was the installation of smart controllers. And we are personally engaged heavily at this point in the smart irrigation controller part of it. But it's a case of where, as we talked about it, Richard, right? We said, well, it's probably better to spend that $10,000 on the irrigation system overhaul in terms of valves, heads, drip before doing the controller installation. What do you think? What do you think on that, Richard?
Yeah, I think, I always say this, right? If we put on a smart controller that's going to water the exact correct amount of water at the right time, then any deficiencies you have in your irrigation system are going to stick out like a sore thumb, because what people do is when the system's deficient, they just overwater. And so we want to reduce the overwatering. But at that point, if you don't take care of system issues, then you will have a landscape that doesn't look like you want it to look like. So there is a combination there that you can't do one without the other. I agree with you there.
Yeah, and I agree. And just to extend that a little further is that a member of an HOA board came up to me and said, my landscape managers would like smart controllers, really for the connectivity benefit. And then just in the course of the conversation, she said, and we're thinking of doing, there's funding available here in our area for landscape conversion. So there was a turf area, and she said this doesn't look good, as summer comes, and so this is one we'd like to take out anyway. And I said, what are you going to convert it to? And she said, we're going to convert it to a water-wise drip zone. But what I know about that property, I've known it since I was, I helped install some of the turf when I was 12 years old. And so I've known it for a very, very long time. And they don't have the rest of the system necessary to make drip successful in that area. And so they'll actually end up with something that looks great on initial installation, but will be very hard for them to keep water going to, to keep the irrigation right on a drip irrigation system for that one zone, because the rest of the system isn't built to provide the level of filtration that's needed. And it becomes a much higher maintenance zone. And I will argue this until I'm blue in the face, and you know this, Richard, which is that the cool season turf is actually extremely water wise. It's our watering practices that don't conform to that being water wise. In other words, with a very small amount of irrigation, that turf can look very good in the spring and in the fall, then look very low irrigation in the summer. And there's a level of acceptance of it not being a perfectly green turf in July, but with much lower maintenance. And so I think those trade-offs need to be discussed more before a HOA board member gets sold on the idea of, let's make this low maintenance and water wise, when that may not be the case. And so
Yeah.
I think the bottom line is, we get the system right. What we usually say is, look, at least be it on the overhead irrigation, be at least 75% efficient, and then as measured, and then on the drip irrigation, shoot for a 90 plus. And obviously you can get higher than 90, but that's going to be a matter of whether or not you really go to a point source approach with the drip. Sometimes it makes more sense just to use emitter line, and the efficiencies with emitter line, depending on the densities of the plantings, can be a little bit lower. But the savings are significant. And Richard, you and I have an experience with an Arizona HOA that saved $125,000 on their irrigation, right? That's irrigation, that's demand reduction. So that's not just dollars saved, but that's water saved with no turf removal.
Yeah.
And but good irrigation efficiency on that overhead irrigation, and the ROI from that can be very, very fast. Any comments, from your experience, Richard? You are more experienced than I am.
Yeah. I don't know about that. You've got a lot more controllers out there than I ever did. So Look, we've got a person making a comment too in one of our viewers that's saying it's really important to lay out that ROI calculation for your HOA boards and your building owners. Once they see that, it's a lot easier for them to say yes. And the other thing is, we say $125,000 savings, and that's from a few years ago when water rates were a lot lower. Imagine how this goes on, right? And I don't see a time ever where water rates are going to come down. It just keeps getting better and better each year.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine, but it's in very large properties, we're talking water bills that aren't just in the hundreds of thousands, but can run all the way into the millions.
Yeah.
So this is as you scale up and the complexity goes up, then definitely the savings can be significant, and they do need to be demonstrated. And that's something we'll talk more about in a moment, right?
Absolutely. So one thing I think people get tripped up on is they start to think that smart irrigation is really complicated, something they'll never understand or have the time to learn. What are some features of a smart controller that really make a difference, right? You don't have to do everything a smart controller does, but if you did these few things, what would they be?
Yeah, and so we're saying here, right, that ET weather data is super essential, as could be moisture sensor. And Richard and I sometimes joke that in martial arts you have karate and kung fu, and you could have an argument about which is better. And that's a little bit that argument with ET and moisture sensors, that they can be really, both can be very, very effective. It's going to depend on the specific application and the specific scenario. And that's where I think collectively I would hope all of our expertise comes into play. I'd hope everybody who's listening or watching today just recognizes that these are two very effective tools. Then the flow monitoring piece of it is super important. The thing that really I see go wrong with smart irrigation controllers is that there is an assumed application or precipitation rate for zones. And I've got a lot of experience with irrigation audits. And I will just tell you that even your eyes deceive you. And even the irrigation, the tables, the nozzle specification tables that you'll look at and you'll say, well, wait, this was built to this spec. When you actually go and test it, it is always going to be different than what you thought. And in some cases, some to many cases, it's going to be very different, especially in a system that hasn't been really well maintained. And so a really good metering system is really important, because you then know the square footage of a zone. You can get very, very close with that to understanding, okay, am I applying what I think I'm applying? And then catch cans or catch cups and the formulas associated with them assist as well. And then definitely the ability to have remote access. It's simply not practical. Much of irrigation is done in hours when the sun is set, right, at night, when it's just not practical. It's not, in many cases, not working hours, so that you don't have someone on site. In many cases, you're in very large areas where without the technology, you won't know what's going on. So the ability to have valve fault detection, to know whether or not a zone went on, to know how much water was applied, was too much water applied, is potentially there a break somewhere, or was too little water applied, is there clogging that's happening within the heads in that system, super important. And then the ability to manage to soil conditions, which because of compaction or differences in soil types can be very different across zones, even within the same site.
Yeah,
that's a mouthful. Sorry, but
no, those are great points. And I'll tell you, the more I talk about flow monitoring, the more I see what big advantage it is. I was dealing with an HOA in Arizona recently, and boy, they had a lot more trouble with, just imagine Arizona, it's 100 degrees at midnight. You're irrigating. Do you think people are out on their bicycles running through the water? You bet. And sometimes they have bats, and there's a lot of vandalism that way. And the HOA was, if we could catch this, and the water would shut off when there was an issue and not come back on till we fix it. They could see right away how big the water savings would be. So it's an unfortunate
Yeah.
reason to need that, but boy, that
Right.
was very
Water,
obvious to them.
water theft. But yeah, that is, I think that I hope that's more of an edge case, but it certainly is one aspect of it because unfortunately it does happen. And
Yeah, and we do some inspections for some of our large retail accounts as well, and we're always amazed at what we find. Right, some of these leaks really can hide themselves well, and it's usually the leaks that are really close to a drain that are really hard to pick up. And if you're not specifically doing an inspection to catch that, it's sometimes hard to catch. And boy, those are the biggest wasters. So you have flow monitoring, it'll shut the system off, send you an email, you got a problem, go check it out.
yeah, and I even personally, that's something where I've gone to the effort and expense of ensuring that I have a very accurate flow meter on my residential system, and I'm only irrigating about 20,000 square feet, so it's not huge. So I'm less than half an acre of irrigation, but I can tell you precisely what's going on by zone. And I will say, Richard, I hope you're proud of me. I practiced what I preached. In one of our webinars last year, I did a calculation by zone, saw what I was applying. I went back and did the reduction and got another about 10% savings
Yeah.
by reducing down run times in zones where I was running more than I should have. And there were actually very few where I actually needed to bump it up. And that same thing is right what we do from a commercial standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, well, of course you do. And I think the flow management for residential is important too. I actually had the experience before I had a smart controller and flow sensing of going away on a vacation and having a valve stick the first night I was away, and the irrigation was on for a very long time. Very wasteful. Had I had a flow monitor, it would have caught that right away, shut off, and I could have dealt with it when I got back.
That's a basic feature of our controllers. And then as well, the diagnostics of saying, what is how many milliamps are coming from or to each solenoid. So there's a good understanding of where a solenoid is failing.
Yeah. Yeah, catching it before it happens. So, Stuart, for those out there today that are thinking about, taking on a project and really converting their commercial property to smart irrigation, because unfortunately there's more that need it than have it, right? The ratio, there's still a lot of opportunity here. What were some of the things that you would step them through, strategies they can use to make sure this is successful?
Yep. First, just take that holistic look that we talked about, which is to go in and I will get to. I mean, the point that the viewer made that said that it's extremely important that we show the payback piece of it. That is super important. But it starts with a good site evaluation, right? Going in. This is Irrigation Association Certified Landscape Irrigation Auditor 101, right? But it's to actually go in and do that site evaluation. And then understand where the equipment adjustments need to be made and getting those adjustments up to at least 75% on the overhead and to make sure all the drip is working correctly and getting that efficiency at 90+%. Then determining the right controller to put in. And probably in most cases for large commercial projects, it is going to make sense to do an ET weather-based irrigation controller. In some cases where there's very very specific plantings, moisture sensor is going to make sense in those. And so it's fixing the equipment, understanding then the benefit, the type of controller to use, and then projecting the benefit that will come with that. And that just involves using a combination of flow meters, and water bills work in the absence where there has not been a flow meter on the site and that data has been collected. We then, right, Richard, go into water bills to understand the water usage there. Then we look at it to say, okay, what should that be, right? That allows us to create that payback. And then we factor into that, that just additional benefit to say, okay, if something changes, either high or low flow, we can help then correct that. We can apply maintenance to the right place with pretty good diagnostics of knowing where to go look first, right? Saving time and labor, and then saving water by doing the appropriate shut-offs. And obviously not the least of that, and we just can't stop by saying that one of the benefits of the ET controllers specifically, and certainly having the weather data associated with it as opposed to just having a moisture sensor, is the ability to understand how much beneficial rainfall fell on a zone. And then you can do that weather delay on that zone. And then what we do is we go back and say, okay, how much additional irrigation needs to be applied? And if none, perhaps we can go out days more, as we did here in Utah with controllers in May, because there was enough rainfall in a short period that we got almost a 2-week stretch where we didn't need to water because of rain. So there's so many benefits that coming from having those analytics. And as you mentioned, you captured the point already, is that you can even catch water theft in many cases.
Which I was surprised at how many contractors I talked to that deal with HOAs, that residents are tapping into the HOA water and running it to their personal areas that they water. It's a surprising amount. Now, here, one thing I want to ask about this.
That's because they pay the HOA fee, and they figure, though, maybe the water comes with it.
Right, and all my neighbors are pitching in too.
Okay.
So with the weather data and the rain, I often talk to people that say, "Oh yeah, my controller does that too. You just set it, and when it's going to rain, it doesn't water." But that's one thing that's good. But Stuart, I think your controllers do a lot more than that. They actually calculate the water that rains, right? How much?
For sure, and that's adjustable. I mean, as we've talked about before on these webinars, is there are situations where you may have a roof overhang, where part or in some cases all of a zone may be covered by an overhang from a building, and so that zone we give the ability to specifically go in and say, okay, this receives only half the rainfall or none of the rainfall. So we make that scalable. But yeah, that beneficial rainfall absolutely should be getting deducted from the plant water use, which then allows you to say, okay, I've got enough water moisture in this soil to carry me all the way through this date before that soil moisture balance would drop below my management allowed depletion. I need to irrigate again. And so it's really simple in application for a site manager. But what goes on behind the scenes is profoundly important and technically very, very important. What we do is it's not just kind of a, hey, I delayed during, I didn't water during the rain. No, it's far more important to say, what did I get from that rain?
Yeah, and I think your controllers are the only controllers on the market that do that, and the water saving derived from that is just huge, especially if you're somewhere on the East Coast during the summer where you can get rain every couple days.
Well, I'm sure there are others that do it, Richard. I don't think we can say that, but I really like the way ours do it.
Okay. So the other thing, we talk about this illegal water tap, but I wanted to mention this too. This isn't illegal, but we do find a lot of contractors or baseball coaches in particular that love to hand water. If I'm manually watering my irrigation, how does that affect my schedule?
So, and I'll speak specifically to how we calculate that. And I've joked about this before with you, but my comment is, reportedly near the end of his life, Conrad Hilton was asked the secret to his success, and it was that I tell the guests to put the shower curtain inside the bathtub. Leaks are a problem in a hotel, too, of course. And so what I would say is just first and foremost, let the smart controller work the way it's supposed to work. People, especially the inexperienced users, I wouldn't expect that professionals site managers do this, or professional irrigators. But the enthusiasm of having a controller and saying, the control on the phone and saying, okay, let me run this for 10 more minutes because it looks a little bit dry. We calculate that back in. And so there will be 10 minutes at whatever rate that's being applied that then will be added back to the soil moisture, and it'll be that much longer before it irrigates again. So we just say, leave the shower curtain inside the tub. And by that, we mean just let the smart program run as it does. We've got some fairly easy adjustments to make in terms of incrementally moving up run times, or spacing out the interval. But running a zone manually should largely be reserved for doing an audit, right? When you're actually just checking the system. And again, much of that in today's world is done in the process of irrigating. The wet checks with the type of technology we're using today are much easier. Much of the wet check today can be done without spending time manually running every zone on a site. Is that fair, Richard?
Yeah, and the other thing I want to mention, right, is ever since I heard your story about the shower curtain inside the tub, it seems like every new hotel I go to today eliminated the tub, and there's just a shower, and eliminated that problem. They didn't make showers illegal. What they did is they fixed the problem, and I think that's a good analogy.
Yes, no, that is a good change, beneficial for all. Here then, Richard, I think just takes us to the point where one of the viewers asked or pointed out how important it is to show the savings, and this is an example of how we do that. When we're actually going in and evaluating a site, and really up front of doing that full evaluation, doing a quick evaluation, we get the existing water bills, we understand the characteristics of the property, and that allows us to come up with a quick estimate of saying, okay, here's directionally what we think the benefit could be. If there's a positive response to that, we then get on site and do a fuller evaluation. And so we step it so that it makes sense from a business development standpoint. But once we help people understand how much excess water they're using, it gets a lot easier. And sometimes, honestly, the entry point for the conversation, like it was for me at the HOA, a week or two ago, is the point of saying, well, our management company wants remote control, and so sort of, I mean, it's the Maxicom capability, right? The ability to control the controller away from the controller. But that really is just the starting point of the conversation, which is say, oh yeah, we can do that. And then we prepare the more detailed analysis that says, here's what the real benefit is. And then on top of that, we add the other benefits that we talked about, not the least of which is improved appearance of the landscape.
Yeah, and I look at like this report for Liberty Station, on $177,000 of what they should be spending, and they were spending 98,000 more. And so people ask me all the time, well, don't you do these and you find out that they're actually spending less or watering less than they should be? And I think in my 16 years of doing these site analyses, I've maybe seen that 2 times in 16 years. It is not the issue. The issue is the overwatering.
Yeah, for sure. And then there are cases where the water's unevenly applied, right? So when we say overwatering, underwatering, that's not a site-specific comment. Within any given site, there is overwatering and underwatering, and by distributing that, and as you're saying, though, more often than not, by the time the system issues are addressed and the smart controller is applied, the overwatering and the underwatering, in terms of the balance, is the overwatering's in excess of the underwatering, and it produces that savings. So when it's put together like this, it's a relatively straightforward sale.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you mentioned the Arizona HOA that's saved so much water. This Centerra in Colorado was really an interesting case as well. They were mandated by the water agency that here's a certain budget of water you get. And if you go over that budget, we're going to not fine you, but we're going to charge you more for that water, tiered rates. And what they did is they put in smart controllers, our smart controllers, 661 of them. And we really did see a significant water savings that was actually 24% under the mandated budget. So I want to say that in many cases, I see these mandated budgets come out and I find them to be fair. And then with a smart controller and a good water manager, it is practical. This isn't one in a million where we actually did this. This is a nice example because of the size and the dollar saved, but it really can be done.
Yeah, we have a restriction that's been proposed, and I think we're even into initial implementation where there's a maximum of in a residential environment 0.38 acre feet for a quarter acre and above. And that really then starts to drive the landscape, and that's on new approved development. And that really then will drive the size and the type of landscape. But then still the smart controller, and if that same thing were done in a park setting or in a commercial setting, we still have the ability with smart controllers to use whatever that constraint is, that amount of water available in the smartest way possible. I would hope that no site goes in going forward without a smart controller in it, fully leveraging the features that we've discussed, right? The weather-based or soil moisture-based, plus the ability to monitor flow and to be able to monitor voltage from the valves.
Yeah, you're so right here, Stuart. And really, this is the thing that rubs me the wrong way in a lot of cases, but we're certainly on top of it at Husqvarna, and that's this. Somebody can come in and say, yeah, we're going to save you 110,000 in water and install the controllers and go away, and that's the end of it. But we have cost of water tools in our software. I can turn on one zone at somebody's commercial building or an HOA. And when it turns off with a flow sensor, I can tell you exactly how much it costs to water that. And then we have reports that say you watered more or less today than yesterday, or this week, or this month, or this year compared to last year. And how does it relate to evapotranspiration data? Are you watering more or less than you should? All that information is available with just a couple clicks.
Yeah, and it builds confidence, right, with the HOA boards. And I think one of the things, I know one of the things we're proudest of is our renewal rate.
Yeah.
That we have so many customers who, and of course we do exactly as Richard says. They see the value, and then that just leads to a very easy conversation about renewing contracts. And we're very, very happy with that, because what it says is not only does it work, but it says that the relationship is being kept strong. And so it's just interesting how these smart controllers are a terrific way to improve the quality of watering, improve the conservation of the water, including reducing the amount of water used, and then really providing a super strong relationship with these what we view as just our most important customers. These are long-term relationships where we really strategize together and enjoy the success that we have with smart, really full smart irrigation, in the sense of great equipment and then great scheduling.
Yeah, you're so right, Stuart. Right, to be able to follow through on the savings promise is the whole key. And if you don't, it hurts the whole industry. So, yeah, congratulations to you and your whole team for getting that part done and right. So, all right, I'm convinced. I've watched this. I want to go forward. What are the steps I should take?
All right, it's the points we've touched on. So let's just summarize then how to successfully implement smart irrigation, smart water application technologies, right, in a commercial environment. It starts with the assessment, doing the site evaluation, include catch can in that, if possible, include the water bills in it, even better if there's an existing meter on it, getting that data for the existing schedule and the usage by zone. In a lot of cases, unfortunately, we see that that's not available. We use the water bills. Definitely then for the outdated systems, it's getting the inefficiencies fixed as we discussed. Then it is really then implementing those smart schedules. And then the platform piece of it is a very important choice. Today we've talked about ET versus moisture sensor. We've talked about some strengths of each, and then once that is identified, it is then the idea of saying, okay, how do we manage this over time? And so let's take it to the last point we want to talk about, which is choosing. Can we go to that last? Let's go to that last slide, where we say, okay, who is going to manage this? We're going to help. I mean, that's that, and I say we, but you definitely want good advisory involved in these choices that are made, and part of that, including all of the different site considerations, is going to be the consideration of who ultimately is going to be managing the system on a season startup basis, shutdown, and on a daily basis. And that doesn't mean going in and doing, adjustments necessarily on a daily basis, but ensuring that the system is performing to expectation. Who's going to be getting those alerts? Who's going to need to understand the implications of a voltage alert with respect to a valve solenoid? Who's going to understand the high and low flow alert? Do they know what to do with those? And that could be somebody who's doing the site management themselves for Parks and Rec. That can often be the case. But for many commercial properties, it's going to be ideally an irrigation manager, but in many cases, it's going to be a landscape manager that's going to be doing that. And Richard, as you ran, Valley Crest irrigation, you tied those tightly together, but sometimes there's landscape management that's not as familiar with irrigation. So helping them to understand how to use the smart water application technology, both from a head, nozzle, and drip standpoint, but then also a controller standpoint, is really important. And that will help you understand which features of the platform you can then leverage for them. And there are cases, as we look at it, where we make specific recommendations on what they can and should do themselves, and what they would need to rely on a third-party irrigation professional to assist them with. And all of these have savings associated with them. But in a best case, even with the very smartest controllers, there'll still be a high level of irrigation expertise behind the scenes, because there will be different points in time, not daily, but different points in time where that will be needed. And certainly within our business, that's why we offer periodic wet checks. So we've got the diagnostics that give us the ability remotely to understand what's going on, but to enhance the value that we add, we also then have programs where on a service basis, we will go in and actually do additional periodic evaluations of that system to make sure that it's delivering the results that were expected, and that it's been maintained as designed or as intended after the retrofit.
Yeah, great point, Stuart. Right, it's you can't manage what you can't measure, but now we have the measurement data. So how do you deal with this? And those are great points. Now, what about rebates? Do you see very many water agencies offering rebates these days?
Well, we're super appreciative, because we think this drives adoption. And so in any major irrigation market at this point, where there's any kind of water supply constraint, there will be rebates. They're really ubiquitous. They're not as well known. So that's interesting is that as we talk to the HOA in the last couple of weeks, they weren't aware that there were these rebates available, and that's still too often the case. There are just limited funds to promote these rebates, and we can't get to everyone. So I think that we can all do our part to just keep championing rebates. And I do think there's a strong word of mouth component of this, that as more and more people have success with commercial site management using smart water technologies, and particularly smart controllers and the associated metering. I think that the awareness of these rebates will go up, but there's money that goes unspent every year.
And every year, and I got to say, this is a shout out to San Diego County Water Authority. They are not only rebating for smart controllers, but also for flow meters and master valves. They want exactly what you want, Stuart, is a property done right, and they're ponying up almost half the cost, sometimes more than half the cost of the controllers, master valves, and flow sensors to make sure it's done correctly.
Yeah. And so as we look at the hierarchy, if I were really to just sum things up, Richard, I would say that the hierarchy is fix the equipment, make sure that those efficiencies are within a reasonable range, and we've just discussed that. Second, put in a smart controller, right? And then third would be a consideration of selectively doing landscape conversion. And that's just talking about ease of, so it's talking about going from the low hanging fruit to what ultimately is the higher hanging fruit. And the reason why part of the reason why I put landscape conversion in that third bucket too is that there's actually a limited window where commercial properties can safely execute a landscape conversion without using potentially more water. Because where you don't have a root zone developed, then you've got to apply water to that on a more frequent basis. And it's going to take longer before you can put that into a smart mode. And sometimes they don't get into smart modes. There's just a series of things that have to happen when you put in a new landscape. And so I think sometimes the water conservation folks those who really promote landscape think that Stuart Eyring is against landscape conversion. And I am not. I am just saying that let's get the low-hanging fruit first and then selectively apply conversion, but recognizing that it's in limited months of the year when those conversions can be efficiently and effectively done with high survival and performance of the new landscape. If I haven't been clear enough on that, July is a tough time to do, which is a peak irrigation installation month, but it's a tough time to do a landscape conversion. And so I would just highlight that hierarchy, Richard, and just thank you for giving me time to talk about this topic that I know you love and I love. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. And I think you make a great point there at the end, in particular about the hierarchy. And look, sometimes it doesn't pencil out to make that change, right? You've got to build in, right, the expense of labor, the cost of the trucks, the gas, all the other things that go into it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think we have to encourage everybody to really look at the total cost. And what we're looking for right now, Stuart, I think we are, is just the shortest and most economical path to water savings.
Yeah, absolutely agreed.
Yeah.
Did we have any questions, Richard, in our final minute?
Yeah, we definitely got quite a few questions. I think we covered off on them during the session. Thank you again, Stuart. You're always so interesting and always create extra thought after to see what we can all do to save water and be more conservation and sustainably minded. So thank you, and thanks for the plug on the book.
Congratulations.
You're a big inspiration there.
Where is it available, Richard?
So you can find it on Amazon. You can find it at rizzoli.com. You can find it anywhere that you are buying your favorite books these days. And also remember, you can find all our webinars at our website, husqvarnawater.com. And remember, they're always free and available for you. We're really encouraged by people who want to save water, be more sustainable, and we're doing our part by providing all this education for free. So thanks again, Stuart. Really appreciate it.